Most fishermen at some point experience a guide going bad on them. Whether that's the ceramic insert that cracks and results in lines that break, or whether that's the guide itself comes out or breaks, or the threading pulls out, it does happen on occasion where a guide on a rod will go bad. And I think it's important for most serious fishermen to learn how to redo a guide or to replace a guide on their rod. It's a simple process. It does require a few tools. You need a rod wrapper, a hand wrapper, which can be purchased for relatively cheap. And then you need like a burnishing tool, which is this, some scissors, a line pull through, which you don't need to purchase, but you can make yourself. You need the thread, and you need some guides. It's really a pretty simple process. It's more about having the tools. You also need a rod drying rack when you're done, because you will, in this case, again, be applying a 2-part rod epoxy. So I'm going to walk you through it. It's really pretty straightforward. In this case, I've got a new rod that I'm building from scratch, and I've measured out where I want my guides. You can see these white marks. That's where I'm going to put the guides. But if you have a rod that you're just doing repair work on, and you pull a guide out and you remove the previous threading that's there, it's pretty obvious where you need to mount the guide, because you've got the old guide's marks. But in this case, so I just want to show you the process as to how to do it. So what I do, I like to take a little bit of that rod tip glue and apply that to the guide itself, just on the foot. And what I'll do is I'll heat the foot of the guide up. Not a ton, but just enough so when you touch the glue, again, this is just a little piece of rod glue. And then I've got the mark set where I want the eye of the guide. And at that point, that little bit of glue will keep the guide set on the rod, and you can start threading it from here. The rod glue, this is just a little chunk that I've got remaining. You can buy it at most tackle stores. You can buy these kits that come with 3 guides and a tube of glue. That tube of glue has lasted me like 2 years. I mean, you get a lot of use out of it, and you can see this is all I've got left, is this little chunk. So at this point, I've got the guide on there, and what I want to do now, and I'm sure there's various ways to do this. What I do is I start off and I do, so I'm going to use white thread here just to show you, but I always start it right at the tip of the foot of my guide. And then what I want to do is one wrap away from the guide. So when I say away, in this case, the guide's to the right of the thread. So I want the first wrap to be on the left of my thread line. And then, so I just have that nice and tight alongside. And then you'll just cross over that thread, and I'll do 3 wraps with the tag end of my thread going towards the eye of the guide. So at that point now, what I'm going to do is I'll just start turning the rod and pulling my tag line, because when I turn the rod away from me, I'm going to be getting slack in my thread. So I'm going to do that. And like I've got a little bump out in my line here. That's perfectly fine. And when you slowly turn the thread, you'll see it kind of finds its own place and runs towards the eye as I'm doing this. And that's what you don't want it to overlap. You just want it to run right tight to it. And I'm going to do that until I've taken my 3 wraps of my tag line out. And I'm trying to do this slow so you can see it. And what'll happen here is when I keep turning away, as the thread pulls up on, it's going to cross my tag line, which will then allow it to hold. And then I usually do one or two more wraps just to kind of continue to hold that tag line. And the idea here is we're wrapping towards the guide and we're going to wrap up on our tag line, and that's why you won't see the tag. So I've done a few extra wraps here. Then I'll just take, you know, a pair of scissors or tweezers, not tweezers, but like nail clippers or something to cut that. And I've got probably 6 or 7 wraps now up that tag line, and I can cut it off really close, just like that. And I know, you know, I'm going to continue to wrap all the way up to the guide, or the eye of the guide. So then what I'll do is I'll take my burnishing tool, and this is just basically a piece of plastic with a bunch of different edges on it that you can use. But I'll just bump that first threading to make it tighter, to pack the threads together and get that all nice and neat. And you definitely have some tension on this line. I mean, you're trying to make a nice tight wrap. You don't necessarily want it to be so tight that when you put the epoxy on, the epoxy won't like absorb into the thread, but you want to have it tight enough where the thread's not going to back out on itself either. So now I'm just going to continue to wrap up the rod. And this is all you're going to do until you get all the way up to, you know, the last, I'll say 1/4 inch. And then at that point, what we need to do is insert our what we call a pull through, and that's how we're going to hide the other tag end of the line. And you can see I've got a little bit of a gap here. Again, you just take your burnishing tool and you can clean it all up. And it really just kind of seats itself as you're going. And if it doesn't, you just adjust it. Like I said, you don't want it to overlap, but the thread really just kind of finds its own path. So now I've got about I don't know, 1/8 of an inch, I'd say, to go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the back side of the rod, and I'm going to insert my pull through. And all the pull through is in this case, it's monofilament. And you just slide it up the line, and you've got a loop on both sides. This side's got something to hold on to, so when I pull it, I'm just going to pop it through, but I'm going to put the tag line through this loop, and it's going to pull the tag line back under the rod. So now I'm just going to keep wrapping again, and we can clean up all these threads as I'm going along. And what I like to do is wrap up to the point where the foot of the guide starts pulling away from the rod blank itself and up towards the eye. I'd say I've got a couple more wraps to go. So you can see I've got, you know, about 1/8 of an inch of wraps over my pull through. So I'm going to do one more. I'll go over the pull through, and I'll put my finger on top of the pull through, because I'm going to cut my tag end, which is going to go loose. So I want to keep pressure here to keep the thread from unwrapping. So I'm going to cut it. So now I've got my loose end. And then I like to take tweezers and just go up through the pull through, grab my tag end, pull it back through the loop in the pull through. Then I grab my tag end and I pull the other side of the pull through until it's flush with my thread. And at this point, now it's holding the thread tight. So I'm going to cut my tag end pretty much right up flush to where I've got my pull through holding it. And you can see I've got a little bit of a tag there. Then what I like to do is I'll take my tweezers again, and I'll place the tweezers right on both sides of the pull through. I hope you can see that. And I keep pressure on it, grab my pull through, and pop it through. So in this case, I've got a little bit of tag again left. And what I'll come back and do is cut off as much excess as I can. And then those frays, if you apply a little bit of heat to it, it'll shrink right up. Not too much, and you can see, I mean, that thing shrunk right up. And then you can take your pull through and kind of actually drag it back through. In an ideal world, my tag end would still be under the threading, and you wouldn't even have to do this. In this case, it slipped a little bit on me. But you can just take your burnishing tool and basically work that tag end back under the thread. And then I'll go back across it, kind of get rid of some of those gaps.
Turned off.
And there you go. So that's the threading. At this point, the guide's on there. What you do at this point then is take your 2-part epoxy and apply the epoxy, and we'll show you that here just in a second. The next step is to put the 2-part epoxy on. In this case, I'm just using some Flex Coat. It's a 2-part epoxy, your resin and your hardener. Comes, you can get the little syringes on the top to make sure that your measurements are 100% accurate. That's really the biggest key with the epoxy, is you want to have the exact same quantities. And in this case, I'm just doing this one guide to show you. So I'm just taking 5 ml or half a milliliter, and I'll put that into a little cup. I'll take the hardener, put a half a milliliter in there as well, and then I'll just take a little stir stick and mix these in. I don't know if you can see, but it's kind of marbly when you first put them in there, and the more you mix it, it'll just kind of turn to a clear. Usually takes like, I don't know, not too long. I mean 15-20 seconds with a small amount like this. Alright, so there we've got our 2-part epoxy mixed, and really now it's just a matter of taking your disposable paintbrush, loading the brush up, and then what I like to do is load up the threads first, and I'll just kind of put a decent pile on to kind of get the threads going, and then I'll start working it away up the rod just a little bit. So in this case, that's about how far, I'd say that's probably about 1/8 of an inch. That's about how far I like to put my epoxy off the threads. I don't like to put too much epoxy on the rod. It adds weight, and it actually stiffens the rod up too the more you put on it. And in this case, so I'm just kind of, you're just using the brush to push the epoxy in the direction you want. And in this case, so I've got a little bit of gap underneath the eye. I'll just grab the rod with my left hand right now, and I'll just put a little bit of epoxy underneath it, and then I'll come back and do a little bit on the same side here, and that'll kind of level out and you know, just kind of even out on itself as it's turning. So there's two processes here that you can take. One is you put a nice thin coat on and then come back and put a second coat on. I'm more of a fan of just kind of putting on enough epoxy to get a nice coat as you're doing it. Especially if I'm building rods for a tournament, right, that I need soon, an extra coat of epoxy takes longer to dry, so you're just adding your time, and I've never had a problem by putting just a nice thicker single coat on. And you know, right now you can see it's working in pretty good. I like to take a little bit of heat then, and that just kind of releases any bubbles that were in it, and will let the epoxy kind of thin out on itself. And that's really the process right there. I mean, you've got your guide that's now going to be set in stone as it's sitting there. You know, you've replaced a couple dollar part that if you were to go to a repair store and have it done, you know, they can charge you 20, 30, 40 bucks per guide. And really, you know, it's one of those things, if you go out and buy your rod wrapper and a rod turner, you're looking at a small investment, you know, of, I'm gonna say 50 or 60 bucks. You get some thread, and that's really all you need, the two-part epoxy. I mean, for less than $100, you can have all the tools that you need to repair rods really for the rest of your life. This will take, I like to give it 24 hours before I use my rods. You know, within, I'd say 12 hours, if you're in a relatively warm room, it will be ready to go and you can use. I just like to make sure that it's fully hardened and is, you know, just completely cured. But that's the process. It's not difficult, like I said. You know, I just showed it to you. The more you do it, the better you get. And you know, I can do a guide in a few minutes. It almost takes me longer to line up the guides and make sure that they're all in a row with the other guides, because you really do want to make sure that they are set up really well and not uneven or out of line with each other. But I hope the video was helpful. I think it shows that it is a pretty simple process and that, you know, anyone can do it. So you know, I think it's worth the investment, and it's worth going out and doing. I appreciate you watching. You know, if you've got any comments, please let me know. If you've got some steps that you like to add or different processes when you're building rods, I definitely would like to know them. I mean, I'm constantly learning as well. I'm by no means a custom rod building expert, and the more little steps that you learn, it just makes you a better rod builder and really just improves your efficiency as well, which is always a nice thing. So please like and subscribe if you like the video. Leave a comment, like I said. We'll have some more tidbits coming out here soon. Thanks.